Thank you, and thank you to the organizers for the very kind invitation and hospitality. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss artist publications with all of you. Uh, for the next half hour or so, I will be talking about acquiring and developing and giving access to collections of artist books and other artist publications, reflecting on my own experience, particularly in two institutions, an art school, Chelsea College of Arts, and a museum, Tate. We look at the history of both collections, but we'll concentrate on current developments. And I will leave time for questions and comment afterwards, but do let me know if you have any urgent ones along the way, please. Uh, just a little bit of background information about myself. I'm an art librarian, researcher, and an editor. I joined Tate as library collections and engagement manager in 2021 and was previously librarian and special collections curator at Chelsea College of Arts, but also at other libraries, including Camberwell College of Art and Centre St. Martin's, among others. I'm also the editor of the Art Libraries Journal that is published by Cambridge University Press, the main international academic journal on art documentation and librarianship, where artist publications are regularly discussed. For those of you not familiar with London, Chelsea College of Arts, where I spent about 13 years working in the library, is literally next door to Tate Britain, where Tate Library is based, across a street called Atterbury Street, and that is why I chose the title for my presentation. I'd like to start with a little provocation. Should museums or museum libraries collect artist books and artist publications? The reason I'm asking this question is because artist books challenge categories of knowledge and our institutional structures and practices. How they sit within institutions and their collections within a wider print and artistic landscape can be challenging and complex due to the dual nature as both books, carriers or containers for information, usually visual or textual, and artworks. They are part of the literature of art at the same time as the thing itself. And this is something that came in the previous presentations, and I think this is probably something we will keep returning to throughout the day, because it really is the heart of what we are discussing today, I think. I'd like also to make a reference to the importance of definitions as foundations for collection development and management of artist publications. And they need to be flexible and contextual. They need to be practical, and they need to be informed by research, curatorial and artistic practices. The artist book definition battles, really, of the 1970s and the 1980s have never completely closed, and were sometimes a bit too theoretical, perhaps, or sometimes even reductive, but they were needed to inform the practical work of developing specific definitions to use in local contexts, both the current context, but also a wider historical context of a collection and institution, and to focus on the mission of that institution. And also because terms like particularly artist books or artist publications are often used in such a vague and wide-ranging manner that are almost totally meaningless at times unless you attach a definition, a practical definition, and ideally some examples as well. So before I look at two specific collections, I will briefly mention a couple of these definitions. As we know from the 60s to the 1980s, artist books were radical artworks that used the medium of the book not just as an object, but also as a social construct, often within a political engagement with distribution. And this approach is still alive and well today, but artist publishing in the last 2 decades has become much more varied and diverse and far, far larger than it has ever been, in part because of the impact and interrelation of printed and digital cultures. I'm less interested in producing an all-encompassing definition than in developing a shared working understanding, as I say, in the specific context of a collection. And again, something that has been already touched upon today, that this ideally should be done in dialogue with a community of creators, writers, and curators. There are a couple of definitions that I have found particularly influential on my understanding of artist publications. One is the one put forward by librarian and writer called Clive Philpott. And I'll say a bit more about Clive in a moment. But he said that artist books are books or booklets produced by the artist using mass-produced methods and theoretically unlimited numbers in which the artist documents or realizes art ideas or artworks. And that was published in 1977 on this publication, which is the first, as far as I know, the first ever manual or for art librarians published in English. And it has a chapter on acquiring and providing access to artist books by Clive. And the other definition is by another librarian, Stephen Berry, and you'll hear more about Stephen in a moment as well. He, to some extent, based his definition on Clive's, in part because both of them were working at different points in time with the same collection. And he said that artist books were books or book-like objects over the final appearance of which an artist has had a high degree of control where the book is intended as a work of art itself. In my view, an artist publication needs to be part of contemporary artistic practice and also want to engage audiences directly with ideas expressed using printed matter, often exploring relations between content and container. As waves of digital technology and technological change society, economics, and culture, books continue to evolve, losing some functional responsibilities, that function of being a container or a transmitter that I mentioned earlier, but still powerful and alive. And we have got more artist publications, from photo books to exhibition catalogs, magazines, fanzines, cards, posters, etc., that have ever been published before. So going back to my question, should museums or libraries collect artist books? Well, of course they should. However, there's an important distinction between collecting the new practices and collecting and presenting historical material, even when it's from the recent past. And this is an image of the artist book collection at Chelsea College of Art. It's one of the oldest and largest collections of artist books in the UK. It's about 5,000 artist publications by contemporary artists. I feel that one of the many pleasures of working in an art library is the possibility of engaging not only with information, resources on art as content, but with primary source materials as artifacts, and particularly with artist publications. Using needs, collecting remit and history, alongside practical considerations, resources, play key roles in how you develop a collection and how you manage and support access to it. Working in an art college, you acquire artist publications to support learning, teaching, and research in creative practices. As I say, documenting new developments in contemporary art, often focusing on artistic explorations of the medium of the book, on processes, materiality. And at Chelsea, I was privileged to work with these historical collections that have been developed by my predecessors and benefit hugely from this daily dialogue with a historical legacy. But my main area of focus on a day-to-day basis was really on current artists, publishers, galleries, exhibitions and fairs, locally but also internationally. And in parallel to this, I was very interested in the critical re-evaluation of the institutional collection, particularly around areas like decolonization, for instance, and in discussions around the canon, artistic canon, art historical narratives, who is included in these narratives or not included, and addressing this in collaboration with students and staff, using different tools like reading groups, exhibitions, and so on. The artist book collection at Chelsea documents artist books from the late 1950s onwards. The origin go back to around 1970 when Clive Philpott was appointed librarian and started to collect artist books systematically in response to the democratic multiples in book form made by conceptual, minimalist, Fluxus, land art, and other artists working at the time. It was one of the earliest public collections of artist books in the UK, and one where the majority of the titles that are part of it were acquired at the time of production, not retrospectively. The several hundred artist books available in the library by the mid-1970s were a collection that was used by fine art students primarily, but also staff, and engaging with new formats like artist books and magazines, but also used by graphic design students, printmaking students, and others. And this use really informed the material that was acquired for the collection at the time and continue to do that all the way until today. At the time, the collection was on open access, available as any other library material to the students and the staff of the college. Philpott was not only a pioneering librarian, but he was also very active in early critical literature on artist books. He published an article on artist books in Studio International, an important magazine at the time in 1972, looking at recent exhibitions that had been held in London in the previous 12 months or so that happened to include an exhibition of books and prints by Dieter Roth, an exhibition of the books of Ed Ruscha and Germano Celan, the book as artwork at the Nigel Greenwood Gallery. So you almost have what was to become really a canonical view of 60s, 70s artist books there on one of the very first articles published, and how much of that is coincidence, how much is the significance of being in the right place at the right time, or the significance of critical literature on historical narratives is an open question, really. He was also involved with early exhibitions of artist books, and particularly the Artist Book Walks exhibition of 1975, organized by the British Council and touring around Europe, and the exhibition Artist Books since 1970, organized by the Arts Council of Great Britain, as it was in 1976. And books from the Chelsea collection were used in the images that illustrate the two catalogs that were published for these exhibitions. So again, this idea of how certain collections have a key role in developing, canonic or historical narratives from a very early stage. Clive Philpott left Chelsea in 1977 to become the director of the library at MoMA, and Stephen Barry became the librarian not long after that, and continued with this practice of collecting artist publications and new artist publications. He also was involved in publishing critical literature and curated a number of exhibitions in the 1980s and the 1990s. And again, without going into too much detail, I think that it's important to think about the significance of certain collections, all collections really, in the development of an understanding of a new type of practice, and how the earlier exhibitions of artist books producing a survey of this new practice were only really only got going in the early 1970s, more than a full decade after the earlier examples by artists like Dieter Roth or others. And I was reminded recently of this because we just celebrated the 50 years anniversary of an exhibition in 1973 called Artist Books at the Moore College of Art and Design in the US, which is possibly the first time that this term, artist books, is used to designate an exhibition. Something else that should be mentioned is that collecting current practices well requires judgment, expertise, resources, time and money. And many institutions were not collecting artist publications until the late 70s or in the 1980s. And of course, there's also value in the retrospective collecting of collections that have been collected by others. But that risks missing material. And also, when you have got an art market in a capitalist society as ours, we all know what happens to prices of artist books when they go out of print. So if you don't collect them when they are published, probably you will not be able to collect them later unless you have got a huge budget. Stephen Barry managed the collection in the 80s and 90s, and he separated, for instance, the artist books from the main library collection into a special collection in closed access. This was in part to respond to the use of the collection in teaching, but also because by then these books were becoming historical objects no longer in print, and some of them started to become expensive and difficult to replace, really. He published a book in 1995, Artist Books, The Book as a Work of Art, 1963 to 1995, that is both an attempt at surveying the history of this type of practice, as well as a way of documenting some of the highlights of the collection at Chelsea at the time. He also started developing the collection of artist multiples, and this is one of them. Obviously, something that is unusual in a library context. Often you will find artist multiples in art collections, not in library collections. But again, I suppose this is a theme that we are likely to get back to throughout the day. The connections between the library, the museum or gallery, the archive, and how responsibility for collecting certain materials or making them accessible is often a question of what is the primary goal of the institution, sometimes simply of historical fact, really. The other librarians manage the collection since then. I started working at Chelsea in 2007. After it moved to new premises in Millbank, opposite Tate Britain, where it still is now. And collection kept expanding to around, as I say, 5,000 artist books, which is the current size. One of the areas that we developed over those years was representation from non-Western European, North American artists, and particularly Southeast Asia became both a really important area of practice and one where we chose to concentrate to develop the collection, and also South America as well. Work to improve discovery and access continue, including the creation of in-house cataloging guidelines following international standards like ACR2, MAT21, and so on. We also introduced conservation measures, including using archival standards and temperature control in the stores for the collection, which is something that was not the case in the past. Again, trying to provide access and continue to have an emphasis in the context of an art school on access, but at the same time acknowledging that preservation measures were needed to be able to have long-term access to this material. All the artist books at Chelsea are catalogued on an online catalog that is searchable, and a small selection of material has been digitized and made available online, not as facsimiles, but as documentation of the artist books. I think that this is another interesting discussion. Perhaps it can wait until the presentations this afternoon, discussing what is the role, or what role may have digitization and other strategies to provide access to both knowledge of artist books and to facilitate, for people that are not able to visit on site, at least a degree of understanding of the material. So moving on from Chelsea to the other side of Antwerp Street, the Tate is a national museum with a mission to encourage and support access to art, contemporary art, for everyone. It holds the UK national collection of British art from 1500 and of modern art, international modern art from 1900. And growing in tandem with these two collections, Tate Library has become a national collection in its own right and a centre of excellence for art historical research, with holdings of around 500,000 publications. These collections include around 10,000 artist books, and you can see here on my left what 10,000 artist books look like sitting on the stacks. The collection was established in the very late 80s, around 78, 79, by a librarian, Beth Horton. And it was internationally scoped from the beginning, with an emphasis at times on British artists, and is complemented by other special collections, including the Artist Serials collection, the Scenes collection for about 1,000 scenes, the Martin Parr collection, which is a collection of about 12,000 photo books, and a vast ephemera collection. We try to engage with the widest range of audiences possible and to make the collection accessible and relevant to wider cultural concerns, particularly climate and social justice, for instance. Being a museum environment, it means that publications are both, artist publications are both research tool, but also objects used in display and exhibitions, and also material that is part of our museum loan program and traveling exhibitions. With a collection remit that is international art from 1900, you can imagine that the volume of current production makes systematic collecting impossible, really, even at a local level, let alone globally. So we try to engage with specific artists And an area that I think that is become clear over time is the fact that although now we have fairly developed understanding of artist applications from the 1960s, perhaps into the early 2000s, the field is a lot less well explored and understood since then, and there haven't been very many major historical surveys of the period. So again, it's the work of cataloging and developing this collection and making this collection accessible is a prerequisite and a key stepping stone to then allow this work of presenting this landscape, both in terms of exhibitions and also in terms of the literature. As I say, we have been collecting artist books since the 1970s, and I have a few images to show you of a current display of a selection of key items from the 1960s onwards, currently on display at Tate Britain. Something, again, is worth mentioning from the context of a library and a museum context is the fact that within Tate, the library manager and the library staff, we have curatorial responsibility for artist publications, but we work very closely with the wider curatorial department, and also particularly in areas like prints and drawings, archive and records are also separate collections, and only major acquisitions go through the formal acquisitions process, going through monitoring committees and acquisitions committees. Okay, so the material is used, as I say, in a range of displays and exhibitions, both internally at Tate, but also externally. And I have, as I say, a few more images of current artist books on display at the moment. This is going to look almost like, for those of you that study art history in the distant past, you will remember slide exams. You know, this is, I'm not going to start testing you, tell me what artist books are being displayed, but I thought that these very nice photographs were both sharing with you, again, to look at the context of how this material is presented, which is under a glass case, displayed by conservation technicians with interpretation that has been written between the librarian and the interpretation department of the museum. It's a completely different way of presenting this material as opposed to a art school library context, for instance.